Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, calm has returned to the streets of Aleppo as the Syrian military takes control.
Debris and charred weapons line the streets of Aleppo's Kurdish-majority Sheikh Maqsoud neighbourhood. It's the aftermath of days of intense clashes between Syrian government and Kurdish fighters.
Is it a sign that the post-war peace is holding, or that the deal holding Syria together is starting to unravel? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Hi. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode and what stories you want to see us do next. And if you're on your favorite podcast app, please leave us a review telling us where you're listening from and maybe give us a 5-star rating. It really does help the show.
I'm Bernard Smith. I'm a senior correspondent with Al Jazeera English, and I'm currently in Aleppo in northern Syria.
Bernard, welcome to The Take. So you've been covering the clashes in Aleppo, where you're based right now, and we've been monitoring some of the most intense fighting there since the end of the civil war that toppled Bashar al-Assad in December of 2024. So it's been over a year now. So for 5 days, the Syrian military battled against the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, and it's been deadly. 24 civilians dead at least, more than 120 injured, but there is calm now. So why don't we start there? What led to both sides deciding to put down their arms?
We're not entirely sure. We know that the US has been heavily involved in the mediation between both sides because the US government is a partner of the Kurdish-backed Syrian Defense Forces, the SDF, in the northeast, and also a significant partner of the new Shara government here in Damascus, in Syria proper. So obviously the US seems to have been heavily involved. And I think that's what must have persuaded the Kurds in Aleppo, in those two districts of Aleppo, Sheikh Maqsoud and Ashrafia, to pull out. They will say that they didn't surrender, if you like. They will say they did it because they were trying to stop the Syrian government from attacking civilian infrastructure, hospitals. The Syrian government, of course, would deny that they were doing that.
Yeah, did it happen kind of quickly? Because it felt like this was gaining momentum and it showed no sign of stopping, and then suddenly it was just a ceasefire. Did it come as a surprise?
Well, there were ceasefires, and then the ceasefire got broken, and then there was another ceasefire, and another ceasefire got broken. So over the 2 or 3 days that it was going on, there were on and off sporadic incidents of fighting, quite violent fighting. And I think in the end, the last one that we heard was in the early hours of Sunday morning, when it was announced that out of Sheikh Maqsoud, the remaining SDF fighters would pull out, and indeed they were seen being bussed out. It happened quite quickly in that when they surrendered, they were bussed out, but the deal, the negotiations to get them to give up or to get them to leave, that seems to have taken some time, because, as I say, there were clearly factions in there who didn't want to go, others who were happier to go, and this is one of the problems that the Syrian government is having in dealing with the SDF incident.
Right, yeah, and they left in a hurry. I mean, Syrian forces have been reporting finding SDF weapons and explosives that were left behind. Is there anything we can glean from the types of weapons that they're finding?
When we went in, we were told that they'd found sort of mortars, they'd found these kamikaze drones, they'd found a lot of ammunition. And we know that they've been searching around there for the last, before they let people back in, they took a good 24 hours or so to search people. Those kamikaze drones, as they call them, particularly effective and deadly weapons.
So, Bernard, this outbreak of fighting is exactly what the new Syrian government was trying to avoid when it signed a deal last March to integrate the SDF into Syria's national military. I remember that agreement being celebrated at the time, but in practice, it's proved extremely difficult to implement. And now I know the deadline for that integration has come and gone. So from what you're hearing, why did that agreement stall? Where did the trust break down?
Well, I think it was always going to be difficult from the outset. From what we understand from the SDF side is the Syrian government will say they're quite difficult to negotiate with because some people in the SDF want to work with the Syrian government, and some people in the SDF don't. And it seems to fall along this dividing line of Syrian Kurds who want to work with the new Syrian government, it seems, and foreign Kurdish fighters who are also living in northeastern Syria, making up part of the Kurdish armed groups, who are not as interested in working with the Syrian government. And that seems to be where the division comes. And then in the summer, you had this terrible sectarian fighting and killing in Suwaida.
The south of Syria is engulfed in violence. It's the most dangerous sectarian fighting since the fall of the Assad regime.
Where a lot of Druze, members of the minority Druze community were killed, some of them by members of the new Syrian army. It was a disaster for the new Syrian government, and this stoked some of the suspicion that the SDF have and other minority groups still have in Syria of whether they could work with this new government.
And there have been concerns about, or at least negotiations about how much autonomy these forces might have within the military as well.
Well, this is it. So this is the problem. Is how much autonomy the Syrian Kurds get, the SDF gets. It controls, as we know, sort of a good chunk, of almost a quarter of northeastern Syria. And the view from some members of the Syrian Kurds is, look, we've also been fighting for 14 years. We also want something to get. We also want some reward from that fighting. And they want some sort of degree of autonomy, significant degree of autonomy. And what autonomy they are to be given is the problem. How much self-government do you allow them to have? And this is where the negotiations seem not to be getting anywhere, whether that's because the Syrian Kurds are divided themselves, as the Syrian government might say, or whether the Syrian government is not as willing to give them as much as they want, is still open to debate.
So the SDF has now pulled out of Aleppo. We've seen these images, as you said, of forces pulling away in buses. But the SDF is calling it a partial ceasefire, and they haven't gone far. I know you've reported that they're actually just really regrouping. Both sides are sort of regrouping. Where does that stand at the moment?
The Syrian government has said that it's seen what it described as armed groups regrouping in Syrian Defence Force positions east of Aleppo, in the countryside, about 50 kilometers east of Aleppo. And the Syrian government sees that as a threat. And indeed, if there was supposed to be a ceasefire, if there was supposed to be more negotiations on what was going to happen with the Syrian Kurds, then this is not a good sign. And certainly the Syrian government sees it as a threat and has said that if there's any violence, then it will be met with considerable force.
Wow, it sounds like there's a lot of bad blood. In your estimation, just how much damage has been done here? I mean, is integrating the military even a reasonable goal at this point?
Well, it looks like an enormous challenge, but they've got to try and do it because you've got two very heavily armed groups. You've got the SDF, which is US trained. It's very well armed. They know what they're doing. It's tens of thousands of fighters. And also you have the Syrian government forces as well, tens of thousands of fighters. Certainly, I think, as far as I understand from the Syrian government perspective, they do not want to go to war with the Kurds now. The Syrian government's got enough on its plate, trying to rebuild the country, trying to get foreign funding, trying to get all of that sorted out without suddenly having to launch into a massive conflict, which would be very bloody and deadly because of how committed and how well trained and how well armed both sides are.
Right. So it's a fragile standoff at the moment. The SDF, we should say, still controls a large part of northeastern Syria. I think you said a quarter of the country. There's a lot of resources in that part of the country. But they are certainly boxed in, right? Because the U.S. has long backed them. But Turkey views them as a terrorist group. So it's no surprise that we've seen this really strong international reaction to the fighting over the past few days. We've seen calls from Europe for restraint. We've seen really sharp rhetoric from the regional players and just a general quiet concern in Washington. Who knows what's been happening behind the scenes. Now, the ceasefire, I assume, has eased those concerns somewhat. But if you had to guess, like, how real is the risk that outside powers could be pulled back into this conflict directly?
Well, the ceasefire, such as it is in terms of getting those Kurdish forces to pull out of Aleppo, is holding. But as we've seen, there are SDF units regrouping to the east of Aleppo. So what happens next in the coming hours and days is anybody's guess. I mean, so it looks, I think it looks fragile from here. Whether outside powers get dragged in, that's of course the last thing they want, certainly the last thing the US wants. It's got about 900 soldiers on the ground in northeastern Syria working with the Syrian Kurds to combat ISIL, which in some parts of the world is resurgent. So the most important thing for the US, we understand, is to do that.
We'll have more with Bernard after the break. So Bernard, let's zoom in and talk about Aleppo specifically, where you've been covering these violent clashes. So the violence is happening in these two specific, densely populated, mostly Kurdish neighborhoods, and tens of thousands of people were displaced in just a matter of days. So tell us about what you've been seeing over the past week, this situation on the ground, and maybe what happens now that the Syrian government has taken over there.
So you've got those two sort of neighborhoods of Aleppo, densely populated, perhaps as many as 400,000 people living in both of them. And at least 155,000 left during the fighting when we visited mosques and churches and other centres.
And we're talking about Sheikh Maksud and Ashrafia.
Yeah, between both of them, that total number was for both of those districts. Those are the figures we got from the government when they gave us a press conference the other day. And they're all now beginning to go back. So I've been back there yesterday in Ashrafia and today again in Ashrafia and also in Sheikh Maksud today, and they're being bussed back. So they've been away from home for 5 or 6 days at most. They're now beginning to move back, but some of them moving back to homes that have been hit by mortars, hit by gunfire. Some of them even complain of looting as well while they've been away. So they've got a lot of clearing up. There's a lot of clearing up to be done there.
Is the Syrian government able to manage a crisis on this scale at this stage? I mean, how are the hospitals holding up? How is the infrastructure holding up?
I mean, from what we've seen, certainly in terms of providing food, providing immediate aid, the government seems to have had a hold on it, got a hold on it. There are NGOs operating here. There are a lot of Turkish NGOs operating here, and the White Helmets are operating here, helping the government do that. The message, I should say, also that we've had all the way through this from the government is they really have been trying to sound conciliatory.
President Ahmed al-Shara's promise to unify the country under one leadership after 14 years of war has faced resistance from Kurdish forces, wary of his Islamist-led government.
They really have been trying to sound that they want to sort this out peaceably, that the Kurds are an important part of Syria's fabric. They are an important part of the Syrian community, and they want the Kurds to be a part of that, a part of the rebuilding project for Syria. And indeed, many Syrian Kurds we've spoken to feel that way.
Can you say more about that the tension between Kurds more broadly and Syrian Kurds?
Well, I think the difference is that in northeastern Syria, you'll have amongst the Syrian Kurds there are also foreign Kurds. These might be from Turkey, they might be from Iraq, might be from Iran, and they will have a dream, as many Kurds do, of a permanent independent homeland, Rojava, as they call northeastern Syria, and many of them hold on to that dream. I think there's a view that the Syrian Kurdish leadership side of the Kurds is more pragmatic and is more interested in looking for reconciliation, as far as we understand, with the Syrian government. But there are other factions within the Kurds pulling in the other way.
Yeah, I know that many Kurdish residents in that part of Syria have long feared collective punishment. Do you feel that the government's response so far has possibly allayed some of those fears?
Well, I think, and again, because I think the government might have been sort of shocked and stung by what happened in Sueda, there has really been this massive emphasis on reconciliation, on conciliation, and on this, Ahmed al-Shara is going to meet the Kurdish leader, I think, at some time soon. We've had ministers up from Damascus here in the last couple of days to push that message home. Because, as I've said, the Syrian government anyway can't afford, it doesn't want to go into battle with the Kurds, with the SDF at the moment, because of the enormous cost that would extract when it's trying to rebuild the country. So it's clear, I think, the Syrian government recognises that the way forward is to do this politically, with a political solution to this question.
Yeah. So, I mean, Aleppo has had a rough go of it over the past 15 years, really. I mean, it's lived through sieges, air raids, many years of war. I mean, for residents who stayed there, or especially the ones who have returned after the fall of Bashar al-Assad in 2024, I wonder what this means emotionally and psychologically to see violence flare up like this again. Had people given over to hope? Had they given over to hope? Or, do you think that people are staying cynical, expecting another shoe to drop like this?
You can see immediately how much this city has suffered, not just in those two districts, but in other districts of the city as well. The hotel that I'm in is not far from where the front line was during the civil war between anti-government forces and regime forces, and there's enormous levels of destruction here, hollowed out, shelled out buildings. The infrastructure is very poor, the water quality is very poor. And on top of all of that, don't forget the earthquake that hit here as well. Actually, some of the destruction I've seen, I was told, was actually from the earthquake. So they've had multiple calamities thrown on them. Nevertheless, we found a very welcoming people, a very tired people, that's absolutely for sure, but a very welcoming people who are really desperate just to try and rebuild this city and move forward.
We want this conflict to end. Let there be pain one time, not constantly. There is shelling from both sides. We hide in a safe house, and when the sun rises, we have to leave.
Okay, so say the agreement to integrate the forces gets back on track and they manage to pull it off in the coming months. Is that the ball game? Is integrating the military enough to heal this shattered nation, or do you think what we've seen in Aleppo signals something more structural, that Syria's post-war transition is much more brittle than people wanted to believe?
Many people will say it's remarkable that it's lasted this long since the fall of Assad, that al-Shara has managed to keep the country together. I think there is, it's essential that those Syrian Democratic Forces, being one of the biggest singular armed groups in this country, is somehow integrated with the Syrian military as a whole, with the Syrian government as a whole, because you can't run this country with a separate armed group, very large armed group, controlling a quarter of it, with access to the oil and the resources that we touched on earlier on. So it is essential that that works out. The deadline is essentially passed for that deal that was agreed in March for the integration to be completed. They've got to talk again about how they might come around to it. They'll be relying on American assistance, I think, to do this, because if they don't bring those SDF forces under Syria's national umbrella, then it's going to be a very precarious future for this country without those forces back within Syria.
So it sounds like an integrated military won't unite Syria, but a united Syria is impossible without an integrated military.
I think it's impossible to start uniting Syria without the Kurds, the most significant minority group in the country, being a part of that united country. Because that will encourage the other minority groups there are in this country, Druze, Christians, other groups, to play a bigger role in the rebuilding of Syria.
Okay, Bernard, with the sun setting behind you, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Kevin, it's a pleasure. Thank you.